Okay, so the I Need a Man spell took a completely unexpected plot twist, and it's now complete. I got the pictures I wanted. I've already made some sketches, and now I can redo this drawing exactly the way I want it. So yay! If you don't know what I'm talking about, this is part 2. You can go back and watch part 1. But basically, I was doing a spell to try to get a man to make some reference images for me so I could make some drawings I wanted. And then I found the man, and I decided that I didn't want to do it with him because he didn't really care how I felt. And then I realized that I didn't really tell him how I felt. And that was a huge plot twist. So, but before I tell you the plot twist that happened, let me tell you the backstory of how I met this man. Spoiler alert, I manifested him. I was doing a 6-week discipline and art making challenge with a group of artists that I know, and it ended on June 21st. So it was really intense, really transformative. We all learned a lot. And during that time, the things I was illustrating in my art started happening in my life. It was wild. That's when I realized what a symbiotic relationship my art and my life have. So during the last week of it, I was thinking about Persephone a lot, and I was thinking about how I've felt in a lot of my past romantic relationships. And during that last week, I posted something on my Instagram story basically saying how, like, I always want to be with a Ukrainian man, like someone from the same roots as me, but when I meet them, I feel like they just want to kidnap me and take me to the underworld like Persephone. And I literally said this publicly. So that last week came to an end. On Saturday, I finished my final artwork. That was June 21st. I got everything ready to post the next day, and then I went out to celebrate. And yes, I did some attraction spells on myself beforehand. I may have done a little bit of magic, but I was literally just vibing and celebrating. Like, I wasn't trying to do anything. So I went to this bar that I know to have an espresso martini, and I ended up meeting this woman and getting into this really intense conversation with her. We were talking about, like, you know, relationships and soulmates, and she was kind of asking like why it has never really worked out for me. Not in a rude way, but she invited me to confide in her, and I kind of ended up telling her like some of my darkest secrets from my past. And she just received it. She was like, it's totally fine. Like, I'm not bothered. It's not like a burden for me. And I was like, interesting. And she was telling me, like, you know, you just gotta remember the universe is on your side. The universe wants to give you what you want. And I was like, yeah, I gotta remember that, because I tend to swing a little bit negative in terms of how I speak. As we were having this conversation, this man walks in and he sits down next to me, and I heard him speak, and I was looking at the way he was dressed, and I was like, this man is definitely Ukrainian. But we were both just kind of minding our own business, and I was talking to the woman and everything. And then somehow we ended up talking, and I don't know how it started, but we ended up talking all night. This was June 21st. Our first official date was June 22nd. And we were just talking every day since then. I later found out that he is from the same part of Ukraine as where my mom's side is from, and his grandmother is from the same village as my great-grandmother. Crazy. So a few days after we met, we were talking on the phone, and I was in LA at the time for a few days, and so I, for some reason, brought up the Greek gods, and I was talking about Poseidon, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm like Aid down there. And I was like, who's Aid? Because I don't know the Greek names in Ukrainian. And he was like, you know, the god of the underworld, Hades, Persephone's husband. And I hadn't said anything to him about Persephone or about how I've talked about Persephone in the past. And then I didn't tell him about like that thing I posted on my story because I didn't want to freak him out. I was actually really scared to tell him that I'm a witch, but
after like a couple weeks, he figured it out on his own. And one day he was just randomly like, "You're a witch, aren't you?" And I was like, what? That's crazy. But he was like, "No, you're definitely a witch." And he is surprisingly okay with it, which blows my mind. But it turns out that I have a really hard time speaking up about things, and there was basically some boundaries, I guess, that I wanted that I couldn't say. And so then I was like, "Fuck you, you don't care how I feel." And it's a long story, but the short of it is that it took multiple very frustrating conversations and a drunken phone call late at night before I finally said it, and it finally came out. And when I did, he was like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me that before?" And I was like, "Because I didn't know how to." And he was like, "With words." I thought that doing whatever the other person wanted and not drawing lines and like basically being a good girl was good for relationships. Like, I thought that if I wanted to have relationships and have people around me, I have to be a good girl and a nice girl. But this whole situation made me realize that that is not true. It's actually the opposite. So during that conversation where I told him, you know, the things that I hadn't said before, a lot of rage also came up. And I was like, "I just want to slap you in your face right now." And he was like, "Okay, sure, you can slap me." So the next day we met up, and outside on the sidewalk in front of Tim Hortons, I slapped him 3 times hard in his face. And afterwards, he was like, "Good job, you're not a nice girl anymore." Honestly, the level to which I have terrorized this man is actually unbelievable. I'm just saying, I don't know why he's still talking to me. And then after that, we went to the park and we talked about Aid again. And he was saying how Aid and Persephone are the best couple. But the thing is, Aid does kidnap Persephone. And at least from the myths, we never really know what's in Persephone's heart, because she doesn't really have a choice but to be with him, and she's basically his property. He also tricks her into eating the pomegranate seeds, so there's always kind of a trust issue with him. It's a very confusing relationship, and I have a lot more thoughts about it, but I'm gonna save that for another video. But then we talked about other stuff, and he asked me, what does it mean to be a good girl? And I was explaining how a good girl basically is very obedient, does what everyone else wants, doesn't really have any wants or needs or strong opinions, all of that stuff, and doesn't make any trouble. And he was like, "That's crazy." So this is when I realized that being a good girl is actually ruining my life, because I thought that I had to be like that. And then I got so mad at this man, and I was like, "You put me in a cage." And he was like, "You put yourself in a cage," because he really actually wants to know how I feel and what I think without me filtering myself. Like, he just wants to know the truth. And that is such a beautiful thing. Everything I thought about love and relationships is wrong. I could be sitting there with sauce all over my face, and this man would still like me. So then we did the photos, and they turned out exactly the way I wanted. So I've made some sketches already. I'm just kind of debating if I should stick with a small size or if I should scale it up a little bit. We'll see. If you want to see finished artwork, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to get more spell updates, sign up for my email list at fruitstains.com.